Hello, digital world. My name is Rich Haridy. I'm a freelance journalist and writer who lives in the world of science, medicine, and psychedelia. I'm popping up here to quickly introduce a wonderful In Conversation event I hosted at the end of 2022 as part of the Entheogenesis Australis fantastic two-day conference, Garden States. It was an absolute privilege to have the time to talk to the legendary Douglas Rushkoff. And this conversation you're about to hear touched off on a bunch of fun stuff, from stories about Douglas's time hanging out with Tim Leary to some crazy insight into how modern tech billionaires are taking psychedelics and building bunkers to survive the coming apocalypse. A little plug time before we get to business. I can't recommend enough Douglas's latest book, Survival of the Richest. It's a brilliant little manifesto for how we can overcome being dominated by the techno-capitalists who are trying to take our humanity away and turn us into machines. You can also find more info about Entheogenesis Australis on their website. This group is always doing great work, putting out interesting videos, offering great information. So please visit them, support them, spread the good word. And finally, you can find more of my writing on my website, richharidy.com, or at various places all over the internet. But enough of that. Let's get to the real show. Here is the EGA Garden States In Conversation discussion with Douglas Rushkoff.
Hello, everyone. And hello, Douglas, who's already wired in. So I'll quickly introduce Douglas. For some here, he may not need any introduction. Douglas is a professor of media theory and digital economics at Queen's College in City University of New York. He's been named one of the world's 10 most influential intellectuals by MIT. He hosts a podcast called Team Human, and he's written a number of award-winning books, from Siberia in the early 90s to throwing rocks at the Google bus to his latest book, Survival of the Richest, Escape Fantasies of the Tech Billionaires. So without further ado, let's bring Douglas into the conversation, and could you give a warm round of applause to Douglas Rushkoff. Douglas.
Hey, thank you.
So today's conversation will, I guess, cover off a lot of things. And at the end, we'll have some time for questions, and I can kind of discuss with you guys what we'll do when we get to the question part. But to begin, Douglas, in the weeks leading up to this conversation, I kind of really struggled not with what we're going to talk about, but where to start in this conversation, because you have a real kind of prolific background over the last 30 years, writing about a lot of things, engaging with a lot of different subcultural communities. So I thought maybe the best place to start would be a beginning, maybe not the beginning, but a beginning back in the late 80s, early 90s, when you were involved with the psychedelic countercultures of California and kind of inhabited the worlds of Terence McKenna and Timothy Leary, and we'll talk a bit, I think, about what those communities were and what they led to. But just to begin, I guess, looking back on that era with kind of your nostalgic lens at the moment, how do you kind of think about that era when you think about it now from kind of 2022?
Well, I guess the interesting thing to me, I mean, personally looking back, is, I was just wondering, how did I get access to these people? How did I get to be a friend of Tim Leary or Terence McKenna or Robert Anton Wilson? And really, it's because at that time, I was, one of the few people who was introducing these folks to things like hypertext and virtual reality and email and word processing. And it's because for many of us, the beginnings of the computer revolution were really, or the digital renaissance, as I preferred to call it, we saw it as an extension of psychedelia. That here, the great, I mean, for many of us anyway, one of the main psychedelic insights is that, we're all connected, all is one, there's one big life thing going on here. And the internet seemed to be a very simple, digital, Western way of imitating that psychedelic sensibility. And when we thought about things like virtual reality, and someone like Terence would say, oh, with virtual reality, you will literally be able to see what I mean, right? We saw it as a trip space. And it wasn't coincidental that, I mean, the reason I became involved in the early computer movement really was because my very best friends from college, and I was at my school, which was filled with assholes, I was one of really 12 psychedelic people there. You know, in the early 80s, mid 80s, it was not a big psychedelic time. There were 12 of us. And 9 of the 12 ended up going out to the West Coast to become computer people, which also seemed strange to me. Why would, you know, I knew the computer people I knew in high school were the kind of pocket protector wearing nerds who were really good in math, not Grateful Dead heads. So I went out to California and visited my friends who had, you know, jobs at Intel or Sun Microsystems during the day, and at night they were at their homes in Oakland scraping the buds off peyote cactuses and, you know, doing DMT circles. And it seemed odd at first until I realized, oh, right, the digital technology is inherently psychedelic, that psychedelics people were the only ones who were comfortable hallucinating reality. You know, hallucinating things and then building them into reality, them and kids. And everyone else seemed very much afraid to develop these technologies, to think about them as radically as we were. You know, very few people at that time preferred fantasy role-playing games to Hollywood movies, right? Because you were responsible, you know, you're responsible for your own adventure. You're responsible for your own experience. And it established, I mean, talk about good old days. The reason they were good old days is because the set and setting, as dear Timothy up there would put it, the set and setting around digital technology was a collective creative capability. What can we imagine together? Where when the set and setting on the internet changed, which is sort of what so much of my work became about, you know, business interests came in by 93, 94, and the set and setting changed from the infinite possibilities of the collective human imagination to what can we extract from people through surveillance and control. You know, so for 25, 30 years, we've been living on what Timothy considered a psychedelic substrate, right? He considered the internet as powerful as acid. We've been living on a psychedelic substrate for 30 years with a set and setting of control and extraction, and no wonder we as a civilization are having such a bad trip.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, and we'll get maybe back to the early 90s in a moment, but in terms of that progression from digital technology really kind of being enmeshed with psychedelic culture in the 90s to, I guess, where things ended up today, which is kind of very, very kind of techno-capitalist controlled surveillance industries. Where was that point of transition for you? Kind of, I guess I'm assuming at some point across the 2000s it became co-opted and you lost that sense of this is a free liberatory space, or?
You know, it was actually way earlier. I remember hearing an interview with Jerry Garcia once, and he said, oh, the 1960s happened over a period of like 4 weeks in 1971, you know, as if the 60s was this moment. For me, that moment of you know, a psychedelic digital possibility was, you know, maybe 1991 and 92. You know, and by the time Wired magazine launched its first or second issue at the end of 93, you know, before my book, Siberia, the first, you know, sort of rave book came out, I was already concerned that it was over. You know, but if there was a moment of transition, I would say it was the day that Netscape went public. You know, Netscape was the kind of the first commercial browser, and it was really just a version of Mosaic that was developed as shareware at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. And along comes who is it? I forgot his name now. Who brought it public, and the day that Netscape went public, it was the first kind of big internet IPO, was the same day that Jerry Garcia died. And I took that as a sign that the internet, it was Mark Andreessen who brought it public. I took it as a sign that the internet was going to kind of leave behind those 1960s values and become a more kind of generic accelerant of whatever people threw in there.
So since, I guess, that point, and if there might be kind of some people today that are tuning in or in the audience that maybe are less familiar with your more recent work and more familiar with your kind of 90s writing, since kind of that shift, your view of technology hasn't particularly changed. You still believe in technology, but you feel like we need to maybe take the reins of the directions technology is going?
Or everything, I believe in speech. I believe in, we can use any of these things in lots of different ways. I guess what happened for me is in the early 90s, I was a kid still and excited about the net and turned to some of our kind of psychedelic priests for guidance. And, for better or for worse, John Barlow, who's a great thinker and lyricist for the Dead and one of the founders of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, he wrote a document called the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace that was very influential on a lot of us. And it was this document, that he published it actually at Davos, which should have been a clue. But we were kids, right? Psychedelic kids. Psychedelic forefathers saying, governments of the world, step aside. We can take this thing ourselves. We don't need you. We're going to declare our own laws, our own morality. Leave us alone. And it was a moment that we were all really kind of pissed off at government. They were maintaining the illegality of psychedelics. They had just passed something called the Analog Substances Act, so that if you made a drug, what we were trying to do was with psychopharmacology was outrun legalization, so they could make ecstasy illegal, but then we would change one molecule and okay, we could do this. So they did an analog substance act where they said, well, anything that's like this other thing is also illegal. So they kind of pre-illegalized the drugs that we hadn't yet invented. So they did that, and they also passed the Computer Decency Act, which was basically about online censorship under the excuse that little children were going to be exposed to pornography online. And they were arresting hackers. They did something called Operation Sun Devil, where the FBI went in and, arrested 12, 13, 14-year-old hackers in their houses and, threw their sisters on the ground and made their parents, sit with their hands on their heads. It was really brutal. So we did see government as the enemy. And what we didn't realize is if you get rid of government, you create a free rein for corporations. That government and business kind of balance each other out in a society the way that bacteria and fungus kind of balance each other out in an organism. If you get rid of all the bacteria, with antibiotics, the fungus grows. And so we got rid of government online, and business came in and took over. And they had a very different understanding of liberty and freedom. And so then the internet really, it was like selling a restaurant to the mob. The internet was no longer about the value that it could create for the people using it. The internet just became a way for corporations to run money and to create new kinds of abstracted financial instruments to perpetuate the exponential growth of their economy. And those of us who saw it as something cultural, we were not kicked off, but we were no longer the story.
Yeah, well, I guess if anyone hadn't guessed so far, your kind of media theory is really kind of rooted in Marxist media theory, I think, and Marxist theory in general. You're anti-capitalist to a degree, I think. Would that be an appropriate
Well, I wouldn't be any capitalist if they weren't doing what they're doing. I mean, it's like Marxism is more a response to, it's like, so who understood what was going on? Who understood the way that social relationships become commodified? And he understood that. I don't necessarily believe that his solution, which is to create a beautiful, Robinson Crusoe style ledger to keep track of everybody's value exchanges, is the way to go. I mean, that really just arms kind of social science fanatics with, totalitarian spreadsheets for the, orchestration or administration of our world. But I do think what Marx describes is this kind of pre-commodified social reality, this more instinctual, innate desire to share. For me, that's very consonant with the first impulse that came out of the internet. We had it was so psychedelic at its core. That psychedelic thing, you have your first trip and you're like, oh, let's all live on communes and share, and I don't really need stuff, I just need people. That was what happened, and it happened on the net because the way the net was, the original purpose of the net was to share computing resources. Everybody had dumb terminals, and there was like a computer somewhere on a college campus, and you would like sign out for time. Oh, I need the processor for 3 hours on Thursday night, and you would kind of sign. So computers were a way of sharing resources, which is why there was that kind of sharing agenda kind of baked in to how we thought about it, which is why it was just shocking to us. It was like, oh, I mean, people are going to use this to take things from other people or to own things. It meant, so you can call it Marxist, but I would call it more, anarcho-syndicalist. I was a cypherpunk. It was a sort of a different understanding of, it was different. It wasn't scaled at some national level. I'm going to have some nation that's going to take care of this all with welfare. It was more, we're just going to have a naturally distributed set of resources now.
Do you feel like as you've become older, you've become more political? Because I have read you talk about some of those early days, particularly inhabiting kind of the sphere of Timothy Leary, and Leary was pretty apolitical and didn't really like having politics brought in to his space. Is that correct?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, he did run for governor, right, of California. True. So he was involved. He was involved, maybe in different ways. But no, I wouldn't call him apolitical so much. I might call myself apolitical in the sense of big generic national campaigns. I mean, it matters who's president, whatever, it matters. But my main focus is in reducing people's dependence on those kind of centralized structures of government. Getting people less afraid of, and this is the United States I'm talking about, it's probably not the same there, but in the US, less afraid to meet their neighbors, less afraid of sharing things with other people, of asking someone, to borrow their drill or their lawnmower rather than going and buying one. I mean, these are horrifying ideas in America, and I'm being very, very gentle about them with people, but just suggesting, next time there's a blackout, maybe why don't you just use that as a cue to knock on a neighbor's door and see if they're okay? Just see what happens, see who's in there, So I'm working hard to slowly re-socialize people in the hopes of kind of relocalizing them. There's a lot of prepping going on here, but the way, and I wrote about this in the last book, the way the billionaires prep is by having their own private island or something. The way real preppers prep is they meet all their neighbors and they try to make sure that every one of their neighbors has a good supply of food, because they understand that their own survival is going to be based on the resilience of the people around them, not their ability to fend off the people around them.
Well, yeah, that idea, I guess that comes up a bit in your latest book, Survival of the Richest, which talks about an encounter you had with several billionaires who basically wanted information from you on how to survive the looming apocalypse, so to speak, and what they can do. And that idea of a survival bunker came up, and this kind of concept of, well, you'll need a security force to protect your bunker, but then how do you keep that security force from overwhelming you and taking over your own bunker? And your suggestions were, well, that starts now with kind of reducing inequality and making things fair, but that kind of billionaire ruling class didn't really understand that idea.
Right. I mean, they're trapped in a really, the easiest language to use, they're stuck in a really bad trip. I mean, imagine if you have almost all the money in the world, right? You've got billions of dollars, and the main thing you're focused on is how am I going to convince my guards not to kill me when I'm in the bunker, right? So they are stuck in full Walking Dead nightmare mode and scenario planning against that. I mean, gosh, let's talk about, the top people on the top deck of the Titanic not having fun while all the poor people are dancing down on the bottom. It really made me feel like that. But what I was trying to tell them was to drop in the idea that, I joked, I told the one guy, I said, well, what if you pay for your head of security's daughter's bat mitzvah today? Then maybe he won't shoot you between the eyes when you're in the bunker tomorrow. And they laughed, but they didn't understand. The problem was, and the discussion I got into with them, was I said, why don't you be nice to people? And the nicer you are to these people, the less they're going to want to attack you. And then one of the guys, when I was talking about being nice and caring for others, he was like, yeah, but where does that stop? Where does it stop? Where do we draw the line? He's like, I can't be nice to everybody, right? It's like, what do you mean? If you've got to be nice to the world in order for them not to attack you, then eventually you're just going to have to be universally nice? Just take care of everybody? See everybody in the human race as somehow precious and worthy of being preserved? It's like, where does it stop? Why did I accumulate $1 billion if the world were a nice place? And so they don't even see the possibility, but that's because they're brain damaged. I talk about that in the book too. There's studies now that show that, when you become obscenely wealthy, the part of your brain normally associated with empathy, it shuts down. You put a billionaire in an MRI machine and show them a picture of a starving baby, and the part of the brain of you and me that would light up in empathy doesn't light up. Neurologists say it's as if they've had head trauma. It's that bad. But you understand what would happen. I remember when I was in college, when I was tripping, I used to say, I want to make my life such that there's nothing I could think about that would give me a bad trip. It's interesting, right? And these guys, it's like that's all they can think about. And they're on internet acid, right? They're living on the net. So everything is that magnified, accelerated, awful thing. Look at Elon Musk's real-time meltdown, right? It's so much like a person who's tripping, but someone who's having a really bad trip, and it's because they can't. There's no heart in it, right? They don't know how to open their heart to what's going on, so they don't see that possibility.
Yeah, well, it actually reminds me of a 2018 essay that you wrote, and the title was literally "The Internet is Acid and America is Having a Bad Trip," and that's kind of just that we've immersed ourselves into a virtual world that has been predefined by certain corporate interests, and so we're in a trip right now, and it's not a good trip. Would that be kind of an accurate idea?
Yeah, because I remember when I took Leary on the Mosaic browser, I think it was, for the very first time, he looked at the World Wide Web and he said, "This is more powerful than acid." I'm like, "Well, why more powerful?" And he says, "Well, because you don't have to eat anything, you don't have to take in anything." He's like, "We're going to get people online and they will naturally change." He was as optimistic about the potential of the internet to liberate humanity as he was, even more so, than he was for LSD. But again, it goes back to set and setting. We had the wrong set and setting for the net, or we developed the wrong one. And I do remember how that changed. The internet was a culture story. People were so confused and in wonder at this kind of hypertext universe that we were building, and people were doing it for free. I mean, if you got involved in the internet in the late 80s, early 90s, your parents would be worried about you. It was as if you decided you were going to play Dungeons and Dragons for your career, right? They were concerned. And I remember in 1999 when AOL, the America Online, decided to buy Time Warner. The New York Times called me, of all people, to write their editorial about what did this mean. And I told them, I said, I'm not a business writer. I don't know what mergers and acquisitions, I don't know how that works. I'm the weird-ass countercultural internet person. They're like, yeah, but this is a new internet story. It's the marriage of old media and new media. We want it from a media perspective. So I looked at what was going on from a media theorist's perspective, right? And I said, okay, AOL, Steve Case, the owner of AOL, is taking the play money of his stock, his vastly inflated AOL stock, and using that to buy Time Warner stock, a real company with amusement parks and movie studios and cable television and real wires. Now, why would he be doing that? Oh, look, the AOL subscriber rate has peaked. They're not getting more subscribers. They kind of stopped. So he's cashing in his chips. And I said, well, so this means that probably AOL is about to fail, and that might also mean that the dot-com boom has come to its peak. They're cashing in their chips. And the New York Times looked at that and they said, we can't print this. This is crazy. You know, everyone in the business section is saying this is the marriage of old media and new media, that this is the moment that the internet has arrived. It's going to become a big business story. We believe Wired magazine that says that, you know, that we're in a long boom thanks to the internet, and the economy of the globe is going to grow exponentially forever. And I said, well, if the business section believes that, then let them write the editorial. Right? So they did, and the Guardian of London published mine. And of course, 3 months later, I mean, the deal is the biggest failure that Wall Street's ever seen. But that was this moment of, again, trying, and I'm watching it happen in the psychedelic space at this very moment, of trying to take a cultural phenomenon that is based in sharing and deeply human values, and trying to steer it toward a completely extractive ownership, whatever the opposite of sharing is, let's call it capitalism, toward that end. And the justifications are all of this, you know, game theory and prisoner's dilemma, and it's the way it always works. But all of these prisoner's dilemma economic, behavioral economic models, the underlying assumption of prisoner's dilemma is that you've got two prisoners, right, who you're gonna stick in jail for some amount of time, right? So yes, if we are prisoners, then that kind of selfishness game theory works. But we're not prisoners. We're creatures on a planet with infinite freedom and ability to share. And the fact that we use a prisoner model on it, again, it's like the presumption of bad tripness. How do you want to have a bad trip? Let's imagine we're prisoners of war being interrogated. Why do you want to imagine that as the starting place for how human beings are going to behave with each other, right? And then you get some clue of the mentality of these very damaged people who tend to move into positions of power and run internet companies.
Well, I guess that takes me back to a couple of points that I want to dig into with you. And one, I guess, is the idea that psychedelics can fix this, that there's something kind of inherent about psychedelics that will help enlighten, turn on, save the world. But I know that you had some disagreements with Leary and McKenna back in the day about this idea that there's an inherent spirituality to psychedelics, and there's a kind of, and you talk a bit in your new book about kind of the new kind of tech billionaire class who are taking ayahuasca and going to Burning Man and having big trips, and they're not coming back wanting to fix the world, but they're coming back wanting to affirm their kind of damaging pathways. So, yeah, can you talk a little bit about that idea that psychedelics are kind of maybe a bit inherently problematic in terms of they're not going to fix this if you've got the wrong kind of mindset going into it?
Yeah, I remember when I was in college on my third or fourth acid trip, being just shocked and horrified that assholes who took psychedelics were assholes on psychedelics. I couldn't imagine, because I really believed in those first couple of trips, you give anybody this stuff and they're just gonna be great, right? Let's give it to Reagan, let's give it to Bush, let's give it to that asshole professor, let's give it to the, whoever. Imagine, let's give psychedelics to Putin and he'll stop invading Ukraine, right? And these people were so mean. I mean, and I guess they weren't that mean, but when you're tripping and people are slightly mean, you can really feel the flavor of their meanness. And they were so mean. And I was like, wow, it blew my mind and changed the way I thought of psychedelics. I realized, psychedelics are an accelerant. They are not intrinsically good. Or maybe, then, you can get into lots of arguments about it and say, well, maybe LSD is not because it doesn't have a morphogenetic field, but if you take ayahuasca or mushrooms, there's enough of a kind of morphic resonance and they have their own personality. And that's true, you take a mushroom trip, there's someone there, right? There's something, mushrooms have an agenda, as I experience it, where acid is just like, mirror, mirror on the wall, right? Where mushrooms are like, no, we're here, and you better listen, the planet's dying, and watch out. It could be my projection, but I feel like there's a voice in some of the plant medicines that is not there, like 2CB is just like, I will leave you alone. You have your own, we've got no history, we're just, Sasha Shogun invented it 6 years ago. Here you go, have fun. But the fact that people, and I remember I saw a movie about, it was about the AC/DC parking lot. It was a documentary, and there was all these kids taking acid and still just like breaking beer bottles on their heads while they're tripping. And I go, oh, I got it. There's nothing intrinsically liberative about these things. They are like technologies, and it's going to depend, like Leary used to say, on your set and your setting. So don't make anyone do a drug that they don't want, and don't stop anyone from doing a drug that they want to do. And that's basically that's the rules of the universe, non-interference. And when I would talk to or read Terence, he would often say things like, well, this moment of extreme novelty is coming, and only the people who have had, such and such a DMT experience or have done this or that will kind of make it through the bottleneck at the end of time and be able to rise from the chrysalis of matter into the next state of consciousness. And I was always like, well, this seems exclusive. It seems like you've taken your kind of your Catholic upbringing and transferred it onto the psychedelic experience, as if that same narrative of exclusivity. And I've always been one of those Catcher in the Rye people. It's like everybody must come. We can't leave no soul left behind. I don't want to go into the next realm unless we bring everyone. And if we haven't, then it's not the next realm. Then it's not heaven, right? It's like we all make it or none of us make it. That's just the way it's my outlook on it. So I've always had a real issue with any kind of orthodoxy or exclusivity with drugs, technology, or anything, and I use the non-included really as my litmus test for whether or not the thing I'm doing is worth it anyway. Do you really want to go to Taylor Swift's concert after more people got rejected for tickets than got in? I don't know, I'd feel kind of bad in there myself.
So I guess there's this, for want of a better phrase, psychedelic elitism that has kind of been ever present in psychedelic culture for decades. And I know that you've had kind of direct interactions with Terence McKenna about that and McKenna's beliefs about DMT being important. But that's kind of continued on in terms of post-millennium, in terms of the 2000s. I kind of found a 2006 Rolling Stone profile at the time on on Daniel Pinchbeck, of all people, who was jockeying to be the new psychedelic guru in the early 2000s. And at the time, you were quoted as saying the current state of psychedelia is about as bad as it's ever been. And that was kind of, I guess, in reference to Pinchbeck's kind of pre-2012, only the transcendent will transition through this new phase. And this continued idea that people who take psychedelics feel like they're the right leaders for this new phase seems especially problematic when you have tech billionaires taking psychedelics right now and amplifying their sense. But I guess to get back to my original question, what is it about psychedelics that seems to cause this inherent elitist sense of, I know now and I can lead everyone through this correct transition?
Well, there's a few things. There's a lot of intertwined issues here. First, one of the challenges of psychedelics is not to believe that you've been taken somewhere else. You know, there's a real duality in that. It's like, okay, I took this drug and then I was on this other plane. Or I took this drug and then Quetzalcoatl spoke to me personally. Or I took this drug and I was before the tribunal of great, the wise spirits of this center of the cosmos. And it's like, yes, you were, and no, you weren't, right? It was as if you were somewhere else. It was as if Quetzalcoatl was speaking to you. It was as if you were before the tribunal of such and such and such. And when you take it literally rather than metaphorically, for lack of a better word, I think you collapse the actual multidimensional, pre-realized quantum state beauty of the psychedelic experience. It's potential. It's not this. You're never somewhere else. You're never, and you don't want to go somewhere else. The minute you're using psychedelics to go somewhere else is the minute I think you've lost track. You want to. You're doing it to be here now. To actually be, you're already somewhere else. How do you get back here now? So when it's to get somewhere else or for some other thing, when it's applied, you kind of lose the sacred circle. I mean, I could see doing psychedelics for a certain therapy to get over a trauma and have a reason and set an intention going in. But, it was a great guy wrote a book, Huizinga wrote a book called Homo Ludens, about how human beings are here, should be not Homo Ludens, man the knower, but Homo Ludens, man the player. That we're here to play. And when he wrote about play, he said, with play, you draw a sacred circle around the play, and then if you're going to be really playing, there can't be any real world consequences for the play. It has to be pure. And I kind of look at psychedelics that way, to draw a sacred circle around it so that it's for its own sake. There's a great section in Talmud where the rabbis get this letter from someone saying, what is the real reason for reading Torah? Is it for us, the Israelites, to know our history, or is it so that we behave with greater ethics moving forward? And the rabbis all argue about it, and then one of the old rabbis finally says, you don't read Torah for your history, you don't read it for your ethics, you read Torah to read Torah, right? It's like lishma was the Hebrew word for it. You do it for its own sake. And that, to me, is the sanctity of the psychedelic experience. The thing is, oh my gosh, you mean I'm worthy of, my existence is sacred. I don't need to do anything in order to be a sacred being. We're all sacred beings right here, right now. It's enough. Your arrival in this dimension as a baby or however you got here is worthy of celebration. It is. You are. There's that. In terms of that, and thinking of psychedelics as this place, and we've been there, I've been there, have you, and that's the elitism that bothers me. And you only get it if you think of it as something else. We're all here. We're all here. The baby, I'm not better than the baby because I did psychedelics and it didn't. It's probably more here than I am because it hasn't gotten corrupted yet by the ridiculous programs that I was put through. But the thing I like, and elitism isn't the word I'd use, but it's funny, someone was asking me, what kind of therapist would I trust? What kind of training would I want them to have in order for them to lead me in my psychedelic trip? And I kept going back to the idea that, I would almost always trust a good friend as my psychedelic journey leader more than I would trust an officially sanctioned therapist. And I felt bad about saying that, and it's when I started to think that maybe the commercialization and mainstreamization of psychedelics, a thing that so many of us have dreamed about for so long, is in some ways, I don't want to say a mistake, is dangerous, is treacherous for psychedelics. That in some ways, not being elitist, but being a counterculture, being a subculture, has kept psychedelics in a potentially purer place. You know, there's and the internet makes it really hard to maintain anything like that. But you know, I can compare it to when I found there's a great deceased American beat poet named Charles Bukowski. I don't know if you've heard of him. I don't know if he's big elsewhere. He was a big kind of beat era guy, and the way I found him was there was a kid in high school in 11th grade who had a copy of Naked Lunch, the novel by William Burroughs. And I'm looking at it over his shoulder, and it's got like the word fuck in it and all this weird psychedelic stuff and dripping whatever. It's like, what is this? He's like, oh, it's this weird guy, William Burroughs. Where did you get it? He goes, oh, there's this bookstore in New York City called St. Mark's Books. You go there, talk to the guy at the counter, and tell him you want to see the shelf with William Burroughs. I go down there, go to St. Mark's Books and ask the guy with that kind of wink, wink. I want to see the shelf with William Burroughs. They're not supposed to let people under 18 go see this shelf. And it's this shelf behind the thing back where the like pornographic books are. There was this shelf of the beat poets that we're not supposed to see. And I see the William Burroughs, and then right next to William Burroughs was Charles Bukowski, and I picked that one out. And the journey to find that made sure, you know, the fact that there were levels, it was almost an initiation to find this book, that there was that journey kind of proved my readiness for the material in a way that a Google search does not, you know. And a Google search to the whatever semi-legalized, you know, DMT vape pen, you know, Google Doc Tor network, whatever. I don't know. You know, the strip mall, you know, the strip mall with you know, therapists who've been approved for paying, you know, $1,299 to, you know, approve psychedelics via peterthiel.com. I do not know what that will yield. You know,
Yeah, well,
maybe not something so dangerous, but it's certainly a distraction from what I see as psychedelics' greater role.
well, I've heard you kind of recount an anecdote from Timothy Leary during a Q&A when he was kind of questioned by someone in the audience of what, and someone in the audience kind of asked what they should do kind of moving forward, like, and Leary's kind of just said 3 words. He said, find the others. And the idea was find your people, find the community that understands you. And for decades, that was through, like you described, a journey where maybe you could have a chat with someone and they'd read the same book as you and they'd done psychedelics, and instantly, like a secret handshake, you knew they were your people. Are we losing that? Like, are we losing that when things are so readily accessible? How do we find our people moving forward when we've lost all those secret handshakes and all those coded quests? Where are the people anymore?
Right. It's tricky. You know, it's interesting because Timothy Leary, right, he did say find the others, and I remember when he was dying, he tagged me, right? He go, tag, you're it. That's this kind of joke, saying like, carry the torch. And I decided at that point that I really wanted to change the meaning of find the others from find the other people like you to find the others, you know, find the ones who are not, and find the human being in them, make eye contact with the other, with the MAGA person, the Trump person, the crazy conservative, the anti-psychedelic, find them, find the human, and make that connection. And then, interestingly enough, I don't know why, on a whim, I tagged your nation mate, Tyson Yunkaporta, because I liked something he was saying during a podcast interview, and I went, tag, you're it. And he's extended find, and he took it, right? But he took find the others, and he says, it's not, the others is not the other people who disagree with you. The others is all the other living beings on this planet. The others are the trees and the mice and the kangaroos and the things that you're not seeing because you're so busy on Team Human. So it was really, it's profoundly anti-elitist, right? It's anti-hegemonic. So how do we balance the benefits of tribalism or having a club or having something with with the need to be non-elitist and open and egalitarian? It's kind of tricky. I mean, usually if you can't do it through restriction, then I think we do it by being an acquired taste. Like the Grateful Dead was an acquired taste. Most people will listen to that and go, is that really music? And it's like, yeah, it can be. Don't take my word for it, though. It's not for you, it's fine. There's that. And at the same time, you look back at Leary. Leary was an LSD evangelist. I mean, he really was. He was saying we should all take this. I don't think he would go to that. He wanted there to be some government control. He liked it being used in prisons under supervision and all that. But at the same time, what was going on at Millbrook was pretty open. I mean, I do think a culture of stewardship would be terrific. I mean, we still know. I know how to find the elders. I know how to find. It's a matter of creating the right kinds of invitations, I think. And if we're not going to be thrown in jail for it, so much the better, right? If a college professor can smoke dope with his students without being thrown in jail for it, is way better than having to do it illegally. But it's the good old stuff. I mean, psychedelics is like magic or anything else. It's an initiation. And it's just a matter of treating it with the respect and sanctity that it deserves. And I think we tend to do that better outside of a scientific frame, outside of a human potential frame. Oh, the people who do psychedelics will be 13% more effective at work, 16% less neurotic, and 33% better breathing rate. It's like, and not get COVID. It's like, no. So the benefits are very different, right? Again, it goes back to Lishma. The benefits are more, no, you come, let's talk. Let's go have an experience together.
Was that idea, I guess, of the importance of human experience and kind of flesh-to-flesh interactions, like be here now, people engaging? You recount a couple of anecdotes, actually, in your latest book, and they're encounters with Richard Dawkins and Ray Kurzweil. And both of these stories kind of play out in similar ways where you're making a case for the lived kind of weirdness of the human experience and how that is what makes us human. And Dawkins and Kurzweil seem to fundamentally see humans as code and data, and the goal of progress is to transcend out of these kind of fleshy encasements into the singularity or whatever they individually want to take it. And Dawkins in particular kind of dismissed your ideas as being, oh, you're just a moralist. And I think, can you talk a little bit about those encounters and how these kind of empiricist thinkers are fundamentally kind of maybe missing what is special about being human?
Yeah, I mean, science is great, right? I love science. Science is a model. Science is asking questions. It's a evidence-based interrogation of our reality. It's all good. But the spirit infusing science, dates back to Francis Bacon, who said that, empirical science will let us take nature by the forelock, hold her down, and submit her to our will. So they saw it was a rape fantasy. And the idea was that anything you could quantify and deanimate is real. Anything that you can't quantify and deanimate isn't real. It's a squishy whatever stuff that it's an externality, something we don't have to worry about. It's noise. It's not signal. And that ends up coming down to us as scientists, scientistic scientists like Richard Dawkins, who are basically saying there's nothing going on here, right? There's nothing happening. You are like the equivalent of a CD player, and memes are playing your brain, genes are playing your body, and they create an illusion of consciousness so that you perpetuate the DNA for another generation. But you're not even here. There's nothing happening. And if you can't prove something through evidence, then it doesn't exist. So love or any of that stuff, it's not there. And I mean, never mind that 2 centuries of philosophy has more than put that issue to bed. I mean, just read your Wittgenstein, right? There are systems of meaning that come up with different groups. He has a system of meaning of scientism, and that's fine, but it's based on the underlying assumption that we live in an evidence-based universe. Beautiful assumption, go for it, yay. There's a lot of other systems of meaning, and chances are they overlap, and they all have different roles to play. So he comes with that, and I was arguing for that there's something else going on here, that there's other systems of meaning, that, we may live in a universe that is leaning towards morality, that consciousness may precede matter rather than being an emergent property of matter. It's a nice theory that consciousness came as an emergent phenomenon, but emergence, what is emergence? Emergence, blah, it's like, they don't know what emergence is. Emergence is their word for mysterious transformation, or from one state to another that we can't really name, but it's really kind of cool, and it's just science. It's science, though. Don't worry, it's science. So I'm having that argument. I'm getting laughed out of this party at my what would eventually become my literary agent's apartment by these scientistic guys calling me a moralist. And of course, 20 years later, I see them on Twitter in one of Jenny Hardin's photos that she posted of them on the Lolita Express, which was Jeffrey Epstein's airplane. So it was these kinds of almost eugenics-friendly scientists that were favored by a master amoralist like Jeffrey Epstein, who literally built a dormitory to have like 40 different rooms for 40 young women to live, though he could impregnate each one of them in New Mexico and have all these babies. And he was funding the kinds of science that said that we are just spreading our genes and memes and nothing else matters. This sort of hegemonic domination fantasy of what nature is. Meanwhile, I had an experience on a panel with Ray Kurzweil where he was basically arguing that human beings need to pass the evolutionary torch to our digital successors. That human beings are currently the best at creating complex informational structures. But once quantum computing is here and computers are better at creating the most complex homes for information, then we should pass the evolutionary torch to them, stick around as long as they need us to keep the light on, and then accept our inevitable extinction. And I was like, no, but human beings are special. That's why I told him, I said, human beings, we can watch a David Lynch movie from beginning to end, not know what it means, and still experience that as pleasure. What is that? A robot can't do that, right? We can maintain ambiguity over time. We don't need to resolve everything to a 1 or a 0. We can stay in that weird in-between liminal space. Human beings deserve a place in the digital future. And that's when he said, oh, Rushkoff, you're just saying that because you're human. Right, like it was hubris. And that's when I said, fine, guilty. I'm on team human. And that's when I came up with that phrase, not to mean humans versus animals, but human, fine, I'm guilty. I want us to maintain a place for ourselves in not just the digital, but the climate future as well. And this is seen by these dudes. These tech bros and scientism addicts as a specious, soft, spiritual, Marxist distraction from the matter at hand, which is to accelerate the development of technology fast enough so we can get off this planet, leave the 8 billion larval humans behind, and spread the heavens as post-human intelligences.
Well, That's a good moment. I'll pause for a second. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I'd love to get some comments from, or questions in particular, not comments per se, from people in the audience. And we've got a mic set up over there, so if anyone has a question for Douglas, they can just line up in front of that mic. We can only get through so many questions, obviously. We also have Slido, which is the online resource that I know a lot of people have been engaging with over the last couple of days. So you can put questions in through that, and we will also be kind of alternating between some mic questions and some Slido questions, so don't feel like you have to jump up. If you have access to Slido, chuck your question in now. And while we're kind of getting all that sorted, I might just quickly ask you, Douglas, you talk a bit about degrowth as the way forward. Can you just kind of explain what you mean by degrowth as kind of a modality of what we could be doing to kind of step outside of these paradigms that we're kind of being controlled by? And
Well, I mean, most simply, I did a talk where I told people at the end, I said, why don't you meet your neighbors? If you need to drill a hole in the wall, rather than going, to the convenience store and buying a minimum viable product drill that you're going to use once to make a hole in the wall, and it'll probably never even work again, and then you'll throw it out and leave it in a toxic waste dump somewhere, why don't you knock on the neighbor's house and see if they've got a drill you can use, a nice big metal drill that Joe's got over there. Why don't you do that? And I was setting it up really as a way of feeling willing to borrow stuff from other people. And someone got up and said, well, if everybody did that, what happens to the workers at the drill factory? Right? We're not using as many drills, so they're not going to have jobs. And think about that for a second. So now we're saying the purpose of a job is not to get work we need done. The purpose of a job is to be able to justify participating in the spoils of capitalism, to be able to justify being given a place to live and something to eat. So we need to invent unnecessary work for people so that we can allow them to have food. That's crazy. What if instead of doing that, we said, well, maybe we only need to work 4 days or 3 days or 2 days a week. Maybe there's so little work to go around that we're going to have to share the work so that you're allowed to work for a day and do something like that. And the rest of the time, you're really just going to have to read and have sex and play Frisbee and as if. So degrowth is the idea saying that we don't need to keep society hostage to a growth-based balance sheet. That growing the GDP is an artifact of a 13th century economic operating system. Central currency that was invented not because it was a good thing. It was invented to stem the rise of the middle class in late medieval Europe. People were trading, they had market monies, they were doing really well, the aristocracy was getting poor as the middle class was getting wealthy, so they invented central currency so that in order to transact, you had to borrow money from the central bank at interest, pay back more than you borrow. That's the same money system we use today. If everyone has to pay back more than they borrowed, then GDP has to grow. That's why our economies have to grow. Not because we need growth, but because the banks need growth in order to remain solvent. That means we are all at the mercy of a balance sheet, of an Excel spreadsheet that could be run other ways. So what degrowth is about is really saying, well, what if we decide that growth is not the objective? That sustainable, that sustaining life, sustaining humans is, and people and animals and everything else, Tyson, don't worry. The sustaining everything is the object of the game, and growth doesn't always favor that. So that's what degrowth is. But people hate it. They say, "Oh no, degrowth! You're one of them. You're gonna," and it's the only solution, even to the energy thing. If we all transition to Teslas tomorrow, the whole planet, if even just England tried to transition to Teslas in 5 years, we would use up all the rare earth metals on the planet. That's how many cars there are. You can't do it. We can't just transition to green and make everything right. We have to transition to green, yes, but slowly over time, digging as little out as possible, right? Not sending all the children into the mines at gunpoint. And while we transition, we've got to use less energy. We can't just burn stuff like this. It's crazy. And then not to mention Bitcoin, where we're burning planet to prove our faith in a coin. What is that? It's literally the conversion of atoms to bits in an obscene religious fashion.
So we've got a few questions, I think. We'll start with one from the room. Whoever's at the front of the line there, if you want to step up to the mic, yep. And I think you should be able to hear this mic, Douglas, so I think that, are you there? Yep. Go ahead.
No, it's not on. Oh, is it on? Is it on?
It's on.
Okay, sorry.
Yep. Great, yep, go ahead.
So you mentioned petertil.com vape pen, and you don't know what that will yield, and then mentioned how it is a distraction from psychedelics' greater role. I missed the first 10 minutes of your talk, so maybe you explain it, but like, what do you see that role being? What are we being distracted from, and is it an inherently political project? And sort of, how would you like to see this whole psychedelic renaissance go down, if you had some sort of basic principles to steer it or something like that?
It's interesting. What I find, and it's a clever impulse. You know, our impulse to create greater acceptance of psychedelics is to point out their applied benefits, right? So if we can prove that, oh, look, people who take this are more effective at that, or people who take this are more effective at that, then I feel like we're surrendering psychedelics to the market the same way we surrendered, at least in the States, we surrendered public school to the market. You know, the principals of our schools and presidents of our universities go to CEOs to find out, what do you need your workers to be able to do? So we know what to teach our kids. And it's like, since when are schools a way for corporations to externalize the cost of worker training? Schools are supposed to be to enrich us as people. So there's a sense that we, I feel like we devalue psychedelics by requiring them to do something other than let us trip. We have to prove what they are. You know, we have to put a metric on the wall of what they're good at, and then they will do that. And we may, again, kind of create an over-determined set and setting on them. As you know, and I understand functional psychedelia is an interesting, you know, it's an interesting thing, and I can see that. Okay, let's give it to prisoners so they don't go back to jail. Let's give it to alcoholics to help them get over alcohol. Let's give it to people who've had trauma for the specific reason. I mean, yeah, you give MDMA to someone who's got PTSD and take them through therapy with it. It's remarkable what it can do. So I get that, but there's also this other. Psychedelics, psychedelia means something else as well. And I feel like we need to preserve that by building a culture around it. And that culture might not be consonant with, say, the strip mall. You know, it might not be consonant with scaled internet-y distribution channels as much as it is to something a little bit more local and hand-to-hand and eye-to-eye. And no, I haven't worked out what the solution is to that. I'm just concerned when I see a Peter Thiel or one of his partners wanting to patent an analog of psilocybin and create centers for that, and the jockeying of this drug versus that drug and which is going to dominate this market. When I see, you know, a lot of like Michael Pollan on Netflix and the way he talks about psychedelics and making it kind of friendly in a way, there's something about it that and I don't mean to sound so OG or entrenched in some, you know, psychedelic elitist hegemony, but there's something dispiriting about it for me, that's ineffable. But it's like the difference between Marvel movies and art. There's something in psychedelics that is so personal and scaled to the embodied reality that I want us to at least create some kind of safety for that moving forward.
So I think we've got a question from Nick.
Yeah.
Nick at the back.
Thank you very much, Rich. Yeah, sorry, I'm diverting the question system for a moment. Thank you, Douglas. I just want to say, Absolute pleasure to have found Team Human podcast, especially I found it during the middle of the first part of our lockdowns here in Melbourne, which I think we had some of the longest lockdowns in the world, lucky us. But one of the things that really ingrained me is your perspective and your optimism, but a curated optimism, I'll call it, toward those who are difficult, those who are disagreeable, those whose perspectives are perhaps not the kind of perspectives you want to entertain, but you and on the podcast and the guests that you have a way of engaging and talking about that is really admirable, and much more so than people who will just ignore these people or pretend that you need to play some competitive game of getting the more attention thing. So thank you for that perspective, but I want to ask you, how do you maintain that, especially when it's in your personal life, which I suspect a lot of us have experienced over the past couple of years, when people we thought we knew the perspective of have gone down a little bit of a, I don't know, neo-fascist realm?
Yeah, it's interesting. I find myself less disturbed, although disturbed, by friends who flipped completely, who've gotten completely red-pilled or black-pilled, than I am by friends who are brittle, than brittleness. You know, someone was just texting me, you know, they saw about how in the US, the Democratic Party petitioned Twitter not to publish certain negative stories about Hunter Biden during the election. And he was texting me, you know, during the night, I'm scandalized by this, I'm scandalized. I'm like, scandalized? You know, really? Is that, with all that's going on in the world, the fact that powerful people can call Twitter and get something taken, that scandalizes you? Like, you think, what do you think Twitter is? It's like, you think there's people who can call the New York Times and get a story. Of course, it's the way you're scandalized. That it's just, I'm almost more amazed. I'm like, come on, let's build some resilience. Let's, you know, geez, you're going to be, ooh. You know, or all the people who are, it's like the people who are tweeting the crazy thing about, you know, the virus or whatever, Trump or this or that. I feel less bad about them than my friends who are retweeting these things because they're in horror and scandalized and they spread it. You know, it's like, Jesus Christ, what are you doing? It's like, I know, it's just like, you know, when you have a bad trip and so stop thinking about that, you know, oh God, these dumpsters are really bumming me out. All right, let's go somewhere else then. You know, it's fine. It's like, no, I'm gonna keep going in the dumpsters. It's like, no. So it doesn't. The weird thing is with the most of the people who aren't like my friends who've been black pilled, but most of the people who believe the crazy things, you know, when I am, you know, digging out a friend's house from a mudslide, you know, after a hurricane, and I'm next to a, you know, volunteer fireman with a MAGA hat on the one side and a crazy-ass, you know, Republican on the other, but we have this shared project of digging people out of the thing, our difference in political opinions, you know, which TV star we want to be in the White House, seems to matter less, you know, and I'm trying to believe that our fixation with the figures on the screen matter less than our ability to engage with other people on the ground of reality. You know, they're gonna put catastrophes on the screen. Some of them are real, like climate change. Some of them are fake, like, you know, Hunter Biden or something. But the effect on us is the same. The image of horror. There's not a lot you can do about that image of horror on the screen. But which is why we're gonna differ so dramatically over what to do about those images of horror. But we all tend to agree on what to do about conditions on the ground. And for 99.9% of us, that's really all we need to worry about is conditions on the ground. I remember I talked about it on the show. I got called by some news thing. They wanted me to comment on Joseph Biden's Afghanistan withdrawal policy. I'm like, I have nothing to say. I say, oh, but no, we just need you for 5 minutes. I I don't know how you withdraw from a war. I just don't have any training in that. I don't know. Maybe of the 10 million people arguing about that Afghanistan withdrawal policy on Twitter, maybe 100,000 people having that argument is enough, right? And probably even fewer than that, because we don't know what the fuck we're talking about. So that's why I tend not to worry so much. Like, people are angry about Israel this or angry about Palestine that, as if anybody's telling us what's actually going on there, as if any one of us watching every bit of CNN and reading everything in the Sydney Morning Herald about this conflict have you ever read a newspaper story about something that you actually know about, and then you see how bad they get it? They get everything that bad. So we can't use them as our instrument panel for navigating our lives. And the less that we do, the better. And if we are going to do it less, it means that we need to be that much more locally resilient, so that the decisions that are happening on that giant scale level matter less and less to our actual day-to-day functioning. But I'm disheartened. Believe me. I mean, I have grave doubts about, whether and how we're going to make it, as a civilization through the next 50 to 100 years, and what that's going to look like. People in Pakistan are up to their waists in water. And where are they going to go? We're building walls to stop the free flow of people just in the moment when humanity needs to learn how to migrate again. And so I'm not very hopeful for our collective welfare right now.
I'll jump to a Slido question quickly now. The question says, grateful to have your gaze and voice in the space. How are you engaging with the internet now? What sort of resources are you utilizing, and what spaces are you entering?
I mean, the downside of even getting to my level of fame, which is higher than my level of income. I think you couldn't know this many people without being really rich in the old days. But the internet for me just comes at me, right? So the internet for me is emails to answer and messages coming in and all these various things, most of which I've closed down so that they can just come like on Signal and on text and on Wicker. So I don't get instant messages on Facebook. I don't get DMs on Twitter. I don't get this and that and the other. I'm trying to make Mastodon my equivalent of a social networking home, right? So that's where I'm going to look to articles that people I respect are feeding for me to look at. I'll use them for curation. But my internet life is pretty applied, right? It's email and messaging, and it's not that much play. I am interested in whether AIs can become a new form of entertainment. In other words, we went from kind of books to movies and TV to gaming. And I'm wondering if we go from gaming to AI, where the artist or author basically creates a character, and then the reader, interacts with that character in novel ways. And if that will be something other than a way of doing psychological profiling of the individual who's interacting with the AI. So I become less afraid of the idea of artificial intelligence if it's contextualized as a form of art and entertainment. Which is why I'm talking to people who are using them in that way. I like things generally when artists lead their development more than I like it when business people do.
Cool, we can jump to another question in the room. Yep, the gentleman at the mic. Go ahead.
Hi. I guess my question could be, how can we have a really good trip in a world that's on a bad trip? And I just want to sort of open that up a little bit in the context of what you've said. You know, when you spoke of the Talmud, and the one answer is we read Torah because for the sake of reading Torah, or we do psychedelics for the sake of doing psychedelics, or we're interested in play for the sake of play. But what I've learned, and I'm very sympathetic with that way of thinking. It's just that we can't always separate our play from the world outside of that play, and the problems and the damage of the world sort of enters into our play. It cannot not, in that sense. That boundary is always porous. And so, you know, I confront this problem in my own work. I mean, I work in the field of eroticism and sexuality, and you know, I love to think of it as a space of pure play. But no, all the shit in our culture comes up in that field. And so this is sort of what's behind my question. You know, how can we have a good trip in a world that's on a collective bad trip? Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if you can answer, but I just wanted to just complicate a little bit the richness of what you've elaborated around that whole dynamic of yeah.
It's a conundrum. I remember from my 7th, 8th, 9th birthday forward, whenever I'd blow out my candles and they'd say, make a wish, I'd always wish for like world peace, or that babies are not starving, because I always felt so bad, you know, that here I've got this cake and this party and these presents, and I know about what's happening in, you know, Biafra, Rwanda, or somewhere else. I mean, because it's there, right? It's there, and we are porous. You know, we are one nervous system. You read polyvagal theory. There's really one human nervous system going on, so you're affected by it all the time. The way I move through it, personally anyway, is on the one hand, to move into a state of appreciation, right? There's a big tree that we're all in. I happen to, at the moment that I am with my friends tripping on mushrooms, I am in this beautiful, bounteous green part of the tree. I'm on the healthy growth of the tree. And I know elsewhere on the tree, there's some really awful stuff happening. But what's the best thing for me to do in my healthy place and part of the tree is to metabolize, right? I can now, if I'm aware of it, I can metabolize the trauma, you know, elsewhere in this thing. And I, in some sense, and I don't mean this in a selfish way, but in some sense, if I am in a good part of the tree, I owe it to the whole tree to be in a state of joy, to appreciate exactly where I am at that moment. And no, you can't shut out. I mean, the minute you're shutting out, then you're one of the billionaires trying to get to the bunker. That's the way they're happy, you know, is by shutting it out. The other way to move through it is to move into a state of genuine compassion, and to then build your ability to take in more and more of what's actually happening around you, you know, as you move through things. It's painful. You know, you got to go. It's painful, but it's beautiful. You know, and the last place I would go with that is, you know, someone once in a talk, when I was talking about being optimistic or something, they said, "Oh, you know, you're like you're just you know, you're like in the orchestra playing. You're in the band playing music on the deck as the Titanic goes down," as a critique. And then I thought about it while I'm up there, feeling all criticized and thinking, well, you know, there's something genuinely beautiful about the boats going down. What are we going to do? We are going to play music. You know, gentlemen, pick up your instruments. We are going to go out. What's more beautiful than that? We're not going to fight for that last place in the lifeboat. We are going to play music. We are going to play music. They made the moment infinite. You know, they did. So there's a certain point, and I don't mean to sound defeatist. It sounds a little sad, but we're all going to die anyway, right? It really happens. Sorry, I didn't mean to spoil the punchline, but we're you know, spoiler alert. You're going to go. So man, sing. You know, so sing. And the extent that your psychedelic experience, your erotic experience can be a celebration of what there is to be celebrated, even in terrible times, even going down, there's still a celebration. I was given this life, I have lungs to breathe and a voice to sing. Boy, I'm gonna do it till the bitter end.
So we have time for one last question. We'll just take it from the room really quickly here. If you want to make it a quick question.
Okay, a quick one.
Yeah.
So GDP is the sum of payments to labour and capital, so that's our income. So on degrowth, although going down might seem like a good idea from the perspective of the environment, it's actually a commitment to reduce our income as a collective. And whilst I acknowledge that we have probably exceeded the limits of the planet to carry our population as it currently stands in terms of consumption and so forth, there is one commodity that doesn't potentially use resources and create pollution, and that's information. And aside from some issues like granting people money for doing silly things like using electricity to mine Bitcoin, there is the potential that information can continue to grow without commodity use. So my question is, can the tech bros potentially save us from losing our incomes from degrowth?
Degrowth doesn't mean making less money. I would say 80% of the people could earn more money as we do degrowth, because 80% of the money is going to what, 5% of the people, to be financially obese billionaires by extracting value from every economy. So let's make just 99% of the people, let's increase their salary, all right? And I could still give you degrowth if that was the thing. But the point is not to have more salary, the point is to have more stuff, right? The point is to have food, right? All we're talking about when we're talking about degrowth is, do we need the economy to grow, right? Do you need the economy to grow? We actually don't, or at least we could take, let's just triple everybody's income, right? Let's triple the bottom 99% of people's income over the next 10 years by reducing the multi-billionaire and trillionaire incomes for a while. So let's just do that as my plan for degrowth for the first 10 years of it, right? And then if we want to stop, we can, right? And then you could start growing more. But I think you'll have grown people's income more than enough by doing that. So that one's easy. But we're not talking about how much goods and services people have. We're talking about a very particular kind of style of accounting that was invented by monarchs in the late Middle Ages as a way of extracting value from people and storing it in the coffers of the elite. I mean, that's what it was about. So the obligation to grow, it stymies certain things. So if you look at, say, Twitter, when Twitter was making just $2 billion a year off a 140-character messaging app, Twitter was actually pretty good. But the problem was Wall Street and the investors decided that $2 billion a year is a terrible place to peak. How is Twitter going to keep growing? But what if Twitter's functionality was best operating at the $2 billion a year profit, that was really it? That shouldn't be a problem. Twitter shouldn't have to grow beyond that in order to stay in business. And by the economic model that its original VCs and investors were using, they wanted 1,000x instead of 100x. So that's the sort of growth that I'm talking about. In areas that need growth, we should be able to grow them, right? The economy of Rwanda needs to grow. The economy in South Africa needs to grow. There's great places we can do growth, but the idea that you have to grow in order to stay still, that the balance sheet needs to grow, is not consonant with a sustainable planet. Sure, if you decide growth, that rule that the 11th and 12th century monarchs came up with, that growth rule is now just part of reality. That's it. That's part of it. That even though nature doesn't keep growing forever, human society has to grow forever no matter what, because we've accepted it as a new principle of physics, right? We go there, right? It's religion. We can't question it. Then sure. We can use gaming and other artificial environments as long as we still extract more time, energy, and stress from human beings. None of them are really worth anything unless you have some amount of human attention or sensation attached to them. Even our entertainment is a form of work when you look at it as a way of serving the growth of the economy. Get them at the mall, get them consuming, get them buying, get them sick so they use more medicine, get them worried so they take more, therapy, get them, do whatever you have to. Then sure, then digital is a way to increase. And this is what Vannevar Bush was arguing to Eisenhower at the end of World War II, saying we can use technology to increase surface area on the market so that we can continue colonizing things without going to those countries of brown people that are pushing back. Instead, what we can start doing is colonizing human attention. We can colonize human awareness and get more growth out of this thing yet. And that's where we are, but I don't think we're happy really doing it. So I'm just looking at the possibility of what if we challenge the underlying assumption that we need to grow in order to stay still. Who does the growth serve? Why is it the new rule of physics? Why do all these technologists, why are they all willing to disrupt taxis, willing to disrupt restaurant delivery, willing to disrupt hotels, but no one is willing to disrupt the IPO, the startup economy, the idea of growth? And once they question that is when we would get the digital revolution that I think we were promised.
So on that note, we're out of time, but thank you so much, Douglas, for taking this time today. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you, and could everyone in the audience just, make some noise? It'll come back through to Douglas. And
Actually, the Zoom algorithm is really good at blocking out all background noise. It blocks that effectively.
Oh, the Zoom filtered that out? Yep.
Yes, I could feel it through my nervous system, though. So it's all good through our combined, our connected neurology.
So thank you, Douglas. Thank you.